Welcome back to Hysteria via Backyard Politics. As always, my name is Matty. It's been a little bit too long, but I'm here again to talk to you about some fun stuff as always. So, Seneca Village is what we're talking about today. It's now Central Park, but it wasn't always that way. How did Central Park get there? Well, let's go back in Matty's time machine and we'll talk about it. In 1827, New York was one of the first states to say, hey man, no more slavery. It's not cool. It's not working. It's not fair. It's cruel, unusual. It goes against everything the Constitution is supposed to be. So they got rid of it. But you still couldn't vote if you were black or poor because you had to own property in order to vote. So this was kind of their way of being the nice guys, but still, a little sprinkle of voter suppression at the same time. But in the late 1820s, a bunch of black people got together and they bought almost 700 acres in what is now downtown New York. And they made a village. They called it Seneca Village. And it was a beautiful thing. They had essentially everything they needed. They were self-sustaining. They lived off of fishing and farming. They had 3 churches. Not that I'm for that, but I'm just saying they just show that it was a community. They had 3 churches. They had schools. They had a lot. And one thing they had that a lot of people in New York at the time didn't have was they actually owned their own homes. Back in Seneca Village days, more than half of the inhabitants there owned their own homes, which was 5 times the current New York property to owner average. In Seneca Village, in and of itself, made up 10% of the black vote in New York City. But rich white folk, they wanted a park. So they started looking around what would be a good spot for a park. The first place they found was a place called Jones Wood in New York City. And they went through the city council and got everything passed. And they said, yeah, we're going to put it in Jones Wood. The problem was the people in Jones Wood, primarily white, they're like, no, we don't want to do this. The city council's like, no, we voted for it. We're going to do it. And they said, yeah, but we're white and we don't want to do this. Fuck your eminent domain. We're not doing it. So this is James Beekman. He was a New York senator back in the day during this time of this catastrophe that's about to go down. And he had vested interest and owned property in Jones Wood where, the council said we're going to put Central Park. And he convinced them like, hey, I'm a senator. I'm not for this. Let's go elsewhere, preferably where there's less white people, and make a park. I don't want to do this anymore. And unfortunately, he was very convincing, and it worked. It was actually so unlawful that this son of a bitch, with his own money, paid off city clerks to hide the evidence that the city council voted for Jones Wood, successfully voted for Jones Wood to be Central Park. He paid them off so that they couldn't talk about it to the media. They couldn't talk about it to anybody. Son of a bitch. So he does that, and they switch up their votes, and now they say, we're going to put it in Seneca Village now. We're going to kick everybody out, and that's where Central Park's going to be. That is essentially, that's a low-grade form, low-tactic form of gerrymandering. You're taking away the vote and putting it elsewhere. Except with here, it was complete voter suppression because they took away people's votes via taking away their land. Classic. So that happened, and in 1855, they kicked everybody out. They kicked, in 1857, they kicked everybody out, and they paid them for their homes at a fraction of the value that the homes were actually worth. it's sickening, but it happens all the time. This is where you start thinking about eminent domain. So, sorry, a little late on that slide. I'm getting all worked up talking about this. Eminent domain is 100% legal. It's totally fine for the government to do this. Essentially, you buy your own property, you own your own property, but if the government's like, hey, I don't want you there anymore because I got something better to do with your land, they can kick you the fuck out and you don't have a single say in it. And if you look throughout history, current and in the near and distant past, it usually affects people that are either not wealthy, poor folk, and especially it affects people of color. Just from my own experience, from people I personally know, I have extended family that had a farm just a few miles from where I'm talking to you right now. Big farm, self-sustaining for the most part. Not wealthy at all, but they were living there and doing okay. Local government came in and said, no, we want to make suburbs here. Get the fuck out. Here's a fraction of the worth of your property. You don't have a choice. And then they burned down their house and they made suburbs there. They made a bunch of houses for the most part, rich white folk. It happens all the time, and in this case, it happened almost in my own backyard. Unfortunately, it's not rare. It's not as rare as people think it is. Eminent domain is fucking bullshit. So, talking about all this, with Seneca Village, with the people I know that lost their farm, what does that remind you of when you think about eminent domain? It reminds me of this. DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline. That's exactly what it was back then and what it is now. The government saying, hey, we want to do something, you don't have a choice. And why it correlates to being coincidental to then and now is because the original path, if you will, of the pipeline, the DAPL, was supposed to go through Bismarck. Bismarck's pretty white. 92.4% of the inhabitants of Bismarck are white folk. And that's where the pipeline was supposed to go through. But the people there were like, no. We're worried that if you make a pipeline through a white city, what if there's a spill and it affects our water? So, I don't know. Instead, why don't we tear up some native land? We'll go that route. And that's what they ended up doing. And I know that there's like a limited, halt on production going forward with DAPL, but it's only limited for the time being. I'm pretty sure it's still going to go through, and we're going to rip through native lands, because why take Native American lands once when you stole it from them originally when you can take it twice after you've given back a very small portion of it and then take it again? Son of a bitch. Anywho, not to be a downer, but Texas. This is where I go back to what I was originally speaking of with voter suppression. Texas is not the only state that has suppressed voters, but they are one of the ringleaders of it as far as just, the history of what they've done, especially recently. So check this out. Texas closed 750 polls since 2012 in neighborhoods of people of color. McLennan County alone had a 15,000 resident increase in 2019. Just in 2019. Population there, 50% people of color. They closed down half of their polling stations in just the 1 year that their residency went up. If you talk about anything else in a community where you need more of something, when the population goes up, people would agree. So, for example, let's say you got a town of like 1,000 people and maybe 5 restaurants. Okay? Population maybe goes up to 1,500. mathematically, that would be 2 to 3 more restaurants needed to accommodate for the people that live there, but not in this case. Don't make me tell you why, because I think we already know. It's people of color in communities that are being suppressed when they're just trying to fucking vote. Sick. Also in Texas, I know, I'm not trying to dog Texas. I'm just saying they're the ringleaders, or at least have been more notorious for suppressing voters, people of color voters. The top 50 counties, you got to follow me on this one. The top 50 counties with people of color increase, 2.5 million, closed 542 poll sites, okay? Increase to 2.5 million people of color, you close 542 poll sites. The bottom 50 counties with people of color increase, which they only increased in people of color by 13,000, closed only 34. Do the fucking math. How does that make any sense at all? It doesn't. I get worked up every time I do these. Maybe that's why I haven't done one in a while. But anyway, just to connect, on hysteria here, I like to connect past and present. And Seneca Village essentially is a very, very small representation of what's been going on forever, as far as just suppressing people of color. And oh shit, I don't know how to work this thing so good. So anyway, thanks for having me, Matty with Hysteria via Backyard Politics. And as always, Medicare be with you.